So our next presentation, Justin Brooks. As I said, I've known Justin for many a long day, I think going back into Kabul days, 10, 11, 12 years ago or so along the way. So the interesting part and some feedback over yesterday, we're spending a lot of time discussing blast and ballistic protection and vehicle testing, which is all very important. I'm not belittling it at all. But we know that in the life cycle of a vehicle, the cost in time, in money, in management effort, in processes to keep the vehicle fleet going and maintaining the highest level of operational availability is the key to successful missions, whether it's a UN agency, humanitarian, NGO, diplomatic, military as well, even though we're not in that market. And there is I personally believe, a cultural impasse within senior management in relation to the issues to do with through life support. It is of critical importance, and in fact, as a precursor to this forum next year, there'll be a significant increase in the amount of attention that we focus on through life support, on training, on disposal, because it's so critical along the way. So we're delighted to have Justin in, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to the audience today. As Rob said, my name's Justin Brooks. I'm the Equipment Director for Control Risks. So what does that mean? Ultimately, I'm in charge of procurement for all equipment across control risks operations within the high-risk areas. So that's everything from the uniform the guys stand up in, their weapons, all the way up to the biggest expense of our assets is generally the armoured vehicles. Rob spoke to me and, you know, he asked me about presenting today on the fleet management. I thought, where do I go? What do I start with this? Because the subject is so vast. And I could stand here and talk to you for hours and hours and hours and quote statistics and failures here and failures there. And I tried to trim it down into how we process the fleet management, so I can explain to you how we've done it, the approach that we took, and show you demonstrate some of the savings that we've actually undertaken by taking that approach. I'll also talk about failure. Unfortunately, there is failures. It doesn't matter what we do. We still see failures with these vehicles because they're operating at the high end of their duty cycle. I'll talk on refurbishment, which again is quite a topical subject amongst the armourers at the moment and some of the end users. And then I'll go on to the TLC 300 and our approach of de-risking the TLC 300 into our fleet following the demise of the 200. So control risks, just a quick bit of background really on control risks. We're a global risk consultancy business. You can see there 41 global offices. I think our employees are just over 5,000 now, of which, you know, topical for this is just 2,200 employees in Iraq alone working under the high-risk managed services. We have many service lines. 12, you know, I quoted 12 service lines. It's actually more than that, and that goes from everything from, you know, business litigation, corporate investigation, analysis, right the way through to what we refer to as high-risk managed services, and that's the service line that I work under. That's then subdivided down again into two areas, and that's namely infrastructure security and mobile security. Infrastructure security, quite self-explanatory. That's man guards on facilities, compounds, building installations, etc., doing access control and all of the stuff that surrounds the infrastructure security. Mobile security is the piece that we're going to concentrate on clearly today with the fleet management. Who am I then? I've worked for Control Risk for 10.5 years now. I started as just the fleet manager, and we've progressed, and we've gone through the pandemic and everything else, and we've had to trim our management out, and ultimately I've ended up as the equipment director over everything. Prior to that, I had a full UK military career in the Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, and I was quite privileged to serve 11 years of that with UK Special Forces. And that's where my expertise from the covert armoured vehicles and soft skin vehicles came from. I come from an engineering background. I started in the army as a lowly vehicle mechanic and worked all the way through the ranks to a senior engineering manager within the military. I put up there a keen interest in motorsport, and I'll quantify why I put that up there. So I work at the World Rally Championship level. I work at the Dakar with a company called ProDrive in my spare time. And the relevance to that is they're at the high end of technology, so I get exposure to the high ends of technology and where that can be adapted into my day job, so to speak. So that's the relevance of the motorsport piece. So we'll look at some fleet statistics. You'll see over on the left the size and the disposition of our global fleet. You know, quite varied. Iraq is clearly the centre of mass for what we do, and I'll concentrate on the Iraq fleet itself. So you can see on the right-hand side, we've got 367 vehicles, 360 covert armoured vehicles. We're operating out of 15 operating bases within Iraq alone, and that services diplomatic, oil and gas industry, financial services, etc. So quite a varied client base that we're supporting. Some mileage is there, and this is probably the bit that starts to shock most people. So you can see there the year to date, and that's to the end of September. So in the 9 months of this year, we've already covered 7 million kilometres. So a fairly big utilised fleet. You know, and we have vehicles that are conducting 2,000, 2,200 kilometres every week. And that's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They don't stop, especially in the oil, you know, down in the oil industry, because the oil needs to continue coming out of the ground. We've got 4 maintenance facilities, and I'll elaborate more on this as we go through the presentation. And then we've got some structure as well that we can see there. I'm very much a photograph and a picture paints 1,000 words type person, and just some of the depiction that will, as we go through the presentation, and I'll probably elaborate on some of the photos because it you know, puts some more context to what I'm saying. The photo on the bottom left there was one of our first deployments in Mozambique. That's supporting the big gas field that's up in the north. Some of you may or may not know there was a significant deterioration in the security situation there, and the contractors actually declared a force majeure, and we've maintained a presence there, and we're waiting for that force majeure to be lifted. We've got a fleet of whatever it was, 29 armoured vehicles there. We're the only company in that country currently with armoured vehicles, and hopefully that will start again. The picture at the bottom right there is our main repair facility in southern Iraq, in Basra, and again we support close to probably 290 vehicles from that facility there. And again, I'll talk a bit later about that. We'll go about some of our fleet management structure then. So on the left, a typical hierarchical fleet management structure, and that's just how we deliver it with the people that we do. Nothing special about that. A clear management level, you know, and then the technician level, and going down below that. The slide to the right, so it is still part of our structure, but it's how we deliver the structure, so to speak. So at the top, we procure our vehicles, you know, and that's what, you know, one of the areas that we spoke about at length, and I'll speak about again in length shortly. We operate the vehicles. We continue to monitor the vehicles through the life cycle. We maintain the vehicles. We continue operating them, and then when we deem them at end of life, we dispose of them in whatever legislation, whatever local legislation, international legislation there is. Procurement then. So I'll start on the top left. Specification. My one thing, and there's a couple of common trends that I'll come out to you today, and that's specification and data. You'll hear me talk about that a lot. So we'd start with the specification. It's important from our perspective as the end user to own the specification. We're the ones that know the operating circumstances, we know the constraints, we know the supply chain constraints, we know our operator levels constraints. We're the ones that have all of the knowledge that can set the specification. Now clearly there's a position for industry and the manufacturers to come forward, you know, and it's a collaborative sort of effort. But ultimately, we as the end users need to own that specification because we don't need to be led by the salesman. On the specification, one size does not fit all. Our vehicles that are operating in Mozambique are significantly different specification to the ones we're operating in Iraq. Interestingly, the blast and the ballistic solution is almost identical. Well, it is actually identical. It's everything that's around that that's different in the specification because it doesn't work. And we've proven that, and I can show you, you know, the slides later on where I can prove to you that it doesn't work. So we've got our specification there. We've set the specification. We've used our historical data, etc., and it's all there. So we now look for our suppliers, and we go to selection. There's one area that we clearly have all talked about, and you know, I'm not going to harp on about the certification and different levels of that anymore. I think we've done that today. Is certification of the suppliers. Clearly that's important. Import-export controls. We've come up against a number of issues over the years where import and export controls have actually constrained who we can procure from and where we can procure them from. And that's simply, you know, one country will remove export control or export to another country. You know, and we suffered from that. You know, there's a supplier in the room that sat on our vehicles for nearly 18 months whilst we tried to get a solution to get them out of a different country. So very important. Are they proficient? So we'll go and do a technical evaluation of those suppliers. We'll go and audit, as I'm sure all of the other end users do. But that audit needs to continue. It's not a one-off audit. You need to continue doing it every year or whatever in a time period. Really, really important. Get on the ground and look at how they're doing it. Look at what they're doing. Get in amongst them. Understand all of their systems, all of their processes, and make sure that you're happy with all of those processes. Case studies. Our industry, in the security industry, is relatively small, and we all talk. So as we do in the forum here today, there's other areas that we break out to understand case studies. One company will speak to the other company, etc., about the procurement. And probably one of the contentious areas for us in the security industry, and I make the comment at the bottom, we're a commercial entity, is the commercial evaluation when you're purchasing the vehicle. Ultimately, I'm probably in a unique position to everybody else in this room that I've got a board that I have to satisfy and we have to make money. Well, amongst the end user group anyway. So ultimately, it has to be commercially viable for us to go and procure vehicles. The picture I put up there is, you know, this TLC 200 suspension systems that we can see there. Two clearly significantly different standards of TLC 200 suspension. One's considerably more costly than the other, but almost 10 times more expensive. But that's actually, in our commercial solution, was actually the one that we chose. Because the longevity through the vehicle and the whole through life through the vehicle, you know, pays back tenfold over and over and over. So it's not just simply, in our world as a commercial entity, get the cheapest cheapest technically compliant option. So there is that consideration as well. Fleet management itself then. So the system we use for fleet management is quite simple, and over on the left is the graphic there. So we need to understand the data from the vehicles. We get that data, we interpret the data, and then we act upon the data. And that's as simple as the way we refer to our fleet management and the way we deliver the fleet management. Clearly, the devil's always in the detail. So gathering the vehicle data, all of our data comes from the vehicle. The vehicle is the vehicle for providing the data. Everything comes from that vehicle. Now, it might come from that vehicle in different methods. So daily vehicle checks, you know, key to maintaining our reliability of the fleet is those daily vehicle checks. So there's data coming in from that every day. The weekly mileage, the weekly fuel reports, etc. All of those weekly reports that we receive. Another load of data that we get every week. And then the fault reporting itself. So we run an open book fault reporting. They don't have to wait. As soon as there's a fault on a vehicle, they fire in the fault report and we'll action it. So we'll interpret it and then we'll act upon it. But all of that data comes from the vehicle. Maybe delivered in different manners, but everything about that vehicle comes into us for us to make the decision on how to manage that vehicle. So we interpret the data. When we move down now to reviewing, we review the historical data and the current data. So what do I mean by that? So servicing schedules. We'll look at last servicing dates and we'll set the next servicing dates. And that might be mileages as well. Well, it generally is mileages. So we'll produce then weekly maintenance schedules for the teams. They'll go out. We'll give them, you know, they have to get this vehicle serviced at this level between this date. And there's no you know, leeway in it. It's hard. It's hard and fact, and that's the way we have to manage the vehicles in amongst our user community. And then we'll move to the act. So we undertake the maintenance itself, and that could be the planned scheduled maintenance, so whether that's servicing or inspection, so which is fairly routine all of the time. You know, and as I explained, we have some vehicles that are running 2,200 kilometres a week. So we service at 5,000 kilometre intervals. That vehicle's coming in every 3 weeks for a service. And that may be that it's, you know, it goes 5,000, a 10,000, then a 5,000, then a 20,000. And each of those iterations of servicing is a different inspection of the vehicle. So there's a different process that's being undertaken on the vehicles. And then we've obviously got the fault reports that are coming in from the vehicles. So we'll get the vehicle in, we'll inspect the vehicle, understand what's gone wrong, and then we'll move forward, either rectification and look at the failures across the fleet. And then the last part of the act is recording all of the work and updating any of our records. And ultimately, that's the whole process of how we manage the fleet. Quite simplistic, and there's lots of nuts and bolts into that, and I'll allude to some of that in some of the later slides. That's all well and good, and works very, very well, but it needs to be resourced. If it's not resourced, it'll fall over on the first week. And that's my reference, you know, the graphic on the right-hand side. Our personnel, they've all got to be trained. And that's not just the technicians that changing the filter or changing the engine or changing the axle. That's actually the fleet managers. They need to understand, they need to be trained in how to manage the systems, incorporate the systems that we're using to record all of the data and deliver the data. And also there's an element of not so much training, but an awareness of our senior management. So our senior management need to understand the constraints that we're operating under with these vehicles so that they can plan. Facilities, key. I've seen some people here, you know, that are automotive facilities specialists themselves, and they'll back me up on that. Have to have the right facilities in the right places. Tooling, and specifically specialist tooling, we've all got a toolbox full of stuff, but there's some areas of these vehicles that are quite critical to their longevity. And I spoke yesterday to a couple of people. One of my pet hates is vehicle geometry. These vehicles, because they're so hard on the geometry, because of the excess weight, and they overload all of the suspension systems and you know, and the running gear of the vehicles. The moment the geometry is not restored to what Toyota designed that vehicle around, the vehicle will fall over very, very quickly. And it's proven time and time again. And then the final one is stock. Without a robust supply chain, it's useless. We can have all of the other stuff. If we haven't got that filter to change at the right time, then the vehicle stops. So maturing supply chain and keeping the right stock, you need to identify long lead items. If you've got long lead items that are fitted to your vehicle, you need to overstock. And you need to manage that stock levels and reorder levels and everything else, etc. So although the fleet management system is there, it needs to be resourced correctly for it to work. So a graphic here, and this depicts how we think we've got it right and you know, improves that we've got it right. So if we just look at the graph on the left-hand side, 2014, we were operating a fleet of 284 vehicles covering 7 million kilometres a year. In that year, it cost us $2.5 million to maintain that fleet. And that works out at 36 cents per kilometre vehicle maintenance across the fleet. 2022, we did similar sort of mileage, but look how much we spent on vehicle maintenance. So over those 8 years there, we did something that reduced that considerably. And you'll see that the maintenance costs per kilometre were down to 10 cents. We were fortunate at the end of last year to win a huge project with a client in southern Iraq, and it was 70 vehicles on its own. And it's a big, high-moving project every day. The vehicles are out 6 o'clock in the morning, they're out 12 hours, they're back at 6 o'clock and carrying clients all over southern Iraq. And you'll see there what's happened. 2023 to the end of September, we've already exceeded last year's mileage. And on that run rate, we're looking at 9.5 million kilometres in 2023 covered. Interestingly, we're still maintaining that 10 cents a kilometre vehicle maintenance cost. So how do we do it? The astute of you will have seen that I've worked for Control Risk for 10 years, and actually you go back 10 years when they were really expensive, and now 10 years later we're not so expensive. It's all down to me. That's not the case, clearly. We did lots and lots and lots, and I want to run through all of these individually. Our vehicle specification, which I spoke to you at the beginning about, owning the specification, understanding your operational profiles, feeding that into a specification, speaking to experts, speaking to industry, the manufacturers, and setting that specification. And I've picked a few areas out. You know, suspension, we improved our suspension. The impact of changing that suspension was huge. Cost us a lot of money, but the impact of changing it to that suspension was huge. Integrated electronics. So it used to be horrendous with, you know, power cables running through the bulkheads, you know, backwards and forwards for the VHF, for the HF, for the tracking systems, etc., etc. We moved to a central buzz bar, and I'm not going to steal any of Ian's from Create's thunder for the next presentation, but we went to integrated electronics inside the vehicle, ultimately a buzz bar. So every internal electrical component runs off that buzz bar, and it's not breaking the armoured bulkheads and firewalls all the time. Tyres. Did loads and loads of work on tyres. A lot of people have always fitted the BF Goodrich tyre to armoured vehicles. We came away from that. We were having huge problems. Initial problems were down to tyre pressures being incorrect, and they were overinflated and ultimately bursting when they were driving in the roads in Iraq with all the potholes, etc. So we tried a number of different tyres then. We went through different brands, and we've settled on one brand now, and we've got them across the fleet, and we're really happy with the way they perform at the moment. You know, I've spoke to Theo. You know, there's other options for tyres available, and we're always open to trialing new stuff because we need to evolve. We need to move forward with the fleet. And ultimately, our vehicle's a lot better specification always round. It's a better package. It's better specification. It's more fit for purpose to what we're delivering in the operational environment. Training. I've heard a number of people talk about that. We spent a lot of time and a lot of effort on our training, specifically drivers, clearly, also commanders, the people that control the driver, you know, and our maintainers. We invested in our maintainers so that they're maintaining better. Fault reporting, carrot and stick. I will elaborate on this a little bit more. We were very much under the, if something failed on a vehicle, it was always the driver's fault. Didn't matter. That was the methodology that was used within our business. It's always the driver's fault, always the driver's fault. And what we were getting stories back from the drivers, oh, a dog ran out. Stupid reasons of why something was failing or why something happened. And we used to discipline the drivers. We actually used to discipline them and fine them, and you know, and they'd go on warnings, etc., etc. So we were very much beating them up with the stick all of the time. But what we found, it was going against us. So we were getting these stupid stories about what actually, you know, what they perceived would be acceptable as a failure, when we weren't actually getting to what the actual failure was. What was the mode of the failure? How did it happen, etc. So we changed the methodology of beating the drivers up, etc. And we got so much better feedback from what was going on in the fleet that we could react. And that better feedback has enabled us to develop the specification, improve our systems, whether improve our training, because there's a training deficit, because they're reversing into poles all the time, because they're not having a banksman or something stupid like that. We look at our training methodology. So that carrot and stick on the fault reporting was really important, because I'll go back to that buzzword again, data. That data that comes back is what enables us to manage the fleet in a better manner. In-house maintenance, fairly self-explanatory. Control risks were so dead set against doing our in-house maintenance. We're not a vehicle maintenance shop. We're a security, we're a risk consultancy business. That's not our core business. We're not interested in it. And it took us a long time to wear the management down and you know, and show to them that actually this was a big plus, you know, a huge plus for us to start taking this in-house. And it's just developed and developed. You know, time on jobs is less, the quality of the repair is less, there's not repeat faults on the vehicles. So every time a vehicle's presented, it gets repaired and it goes out and it's done. So there's a huge benefit there. Supply chain, I alluded to that already. Really important to have that mature supply chain. And when you've got that mature supply chain, there's the economies of scale. So we know this year we're going to change 500 oil filters. So purchasing up front and getting the buy-in bargains for purchasing large-scale parts. And we also monitored a lot more. And we monitor everything. And again, I'll go back to that buzzword, the data, information. We're just monitoring everything all of the time and getting feedback from the fleet into the central hub and reacting to that feedback that we're getting in the data.
Can I ask a quick question?
You can.
You talk about specification, you talk about the number of vehicles, but you don't talk about the fleet mix. So say it's all LC200s as an example. But do you go to say this?
I'll get you a slide. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Fine. So you talk about specification and you talk about the fleet, but you don't talk about the fleet mix. So my point is, if you've got, say, they're all 200 series vehicles and you've got 100, do you get them all from the same supplier or from a different mix? Because each supplier will do things in a different way, which will mean the kind of drivers operate in a different way, the fire protection system's different, some of the cabling's different, the access is different, the supply chain's different. So that fleet mix has a real significant impact. So do you try to keep them all through the same armourer to the same specification, or do you find that it's a mix within
so
them?
we've got them from several different armourers, built to our specification though. And that's the bit I'm trying to say is, it's our specification, and there's a number of armourers in here that we've purchased vehicles off, and they'll all know about our specification. We deliver that specification to them, and that's how we want those vehicles delivered.
Fine. And then with just one bit, a little bit deeper on that, is then around, depending where those individuals are getting the vehicles from, you obviously got the kind of Euro, the engine that you can set with the specification, but if it's come from the Middle East or if it's come from somewhere slightly different, you get some mixes with the base platform as well. I guess, do you try and iron that out through the specification too?
Yeah, I mean, we historically, we've always bought grey market vehicles,
Yeah.
the GCC vehicles, because that's been the only option. A perfect example of that is we put right-hand drive vehicles into Mozambique. There was a limited amount of GCC right-hand drive vehicles, but the majority of them we had to purchase from the Australian market, because that's the only place we could get the right-hand drive version. And that comes with all of the issues of DPF and Euro 6 and the fuel in Mozambique not supporting that. So there's a whole raft of issues that we have to run through with that. But we try and manage that in collaboration with the people we purchase the vehicles from. And it's, again, it goes back to that specification. It's, you need to understand that specification and detail that specification.
No, thank you. That's really clear. Thank you.
I alluded earlier, we will always come amongst failure. These vehicles are right at the top end of their duty cycle. We're asking them to do more than they were ever designed really to do. And we're just lucky that that platform, the Toyota platform, seems to stick it. So what do we do and how do we learn from failure? So realistically, we perceive there's three main causation factors of failure amongst our vehicle fleet. And that's exceeding our operational limitations, the original design, and obviously the last one, the human error piece. I'll come back to that side of the slide in a minute, and I'll go to the right. So how do we deal with failure? We get presented with a failure. We'll do our initial technical inspection of the vehicle and try and understand what's happened from a technical perspective. We'll then does it need, is this an emergency? Is it a serious safety factor? Does it need to go fleet-wide now? Or can we continue just investigating this single failure as it is? That's the next point. So we move on to the in-depth investigation. We'll get feedback off the drivers. We'll get feedback from anybody that was involved with the failure, whether that's commanders, clients that were in the vehicle at the time, whatever else. We'll try and glean as much information. We'll review maintenance history clearly for that vehicle, because it all exists. Every single vehicle, every single piece of equipment that's been changed on that vehicle, we've got a complete record of it all. We'll do data sift for previous occurrences of that failure. Are we starting to see a trend, etc., etc.? And then we'll compile a full report detailing the root cause analysis and what we predict to be the remedy for that failure. So we'll then go on to the rectification. We'll produce the remedial action. We'll then look, well, actually, do we need to update that specification? So the next vehicles we order, that's already mitigated. Those failures we've seen are now updated in the vehicle specification, and we won't see it again because the specification has improved. Operational procedure changes. Was that the causation? Try and think of an example of that. Kurdistan. So we have a number of vehicles operating up in Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Significantly different environment to federal Iraq. Really, really hilly. A lot of hills. We started to see, we service those vehicles the same at 5,000 kilometres. We started to see vehicles right on the limit of their brake pad wear at 5,000 kilometres. And we put it down straight away. It's the terrain. They're up and down the hills all of the time, and that's where we did. So we looked into it. We did an investigation of how we can remedy it. And actually what we found was we looked at up braking. So they were on OEM brakes. So we looked at harder pad material, went to a harder pad material, tried that, didn't work. Same sort of wear rate from that harder pad material. So then our next option was upgrading the brakes. And there's a number of people in the room that have got solutions that we could have gone to at the time. So we looked at that, but then we had to consider our supply chain. We had to consider how far sorry, the commercial element of that upgrade as well. So when we sat it all down and we looked at it, actually the best thing for us to do was not service at 5,000 kilometres, bring that vehicle in at 3,000 kilometres. And then we've caught it, that it won't happen again because we've reduced. So that operational procedural change from that failure was, actually the vehicles in Kurdistan, because of where they're operating, will reduce the service inspection interval down to 3,000 kilometres. It's done. We've never had another occurrence of brake pad wear getting critical. And then the last one on that, you know, if it is a fleet-wide problem, then we'll instigate a fleet-wide upgrade programme. I'll go back to the left now and try and explain with some of the pictures some of the areas and the causation factors of what we see. So bottom left was an operational limitation exceeded, and that was simply speeding. It was a team, it was really early in the morning, it was like 4:30 in the morning. They were speeding down a 3-lane road. They came up behind a big truck. They didn't anticipate how slow the truck was moving. By the time they made the decision to pull out to go around the truck, they were on the back of the truck and basically just went underneath the back of the truck. And that was as simple as it was. They were speeding, they were late getting to the airport, or some random story I would have got, I'm sure, for the reason they were speeding, but they were going to pick a client up that was critical. They had to get to the airport, and that's why they were speeding. So operational limitation exceeded. The bottom right, that was actually only 2 weeks ago. That was a Toyota Coaster. Human error. And this flicks backwards and forwards between human error and operational limitation. So one of our driver checks on the Coaster was every week they'll unscrew the air filter bowl, they'll pull the air filter out, and they'll go and bang the air filter and bang the dust out of it, and obviously then refit it. That's the driver check doing that. So we had a number of, so anyway, this vehicle got reported on the Thursday, down on performance and starting to knock it. It was at a remote location, so the fleet manager had a video of it knocking. He said, right, yeah, okay, I'm happy with it. Get it in here tomorrow. On the way coming to the maintenance facility that day, the vehicle stopped. Anyway, we investigated it, pulled the head off. It's obviously dropped a valve. They dropped the air filter, and the air filter wasn't secure, and it had been bouncing around in the casing. It had broken up, and basically the engine had ingested parts of the air filter, and that's what held the valve open when the piston came up, clouted the valve, and bent the valve and snapped the valve. Interestingly, you then speak to the maintainers, and they said, we've had 4 or 5 air filters during servicing that have all been loose in the bottom. So we looked at it then, and ultimately it's the drivers being lazy first thing in the morning when they can't be bothered screwing the air filter back up, and they just close the air filter container up, leave the air filter in the bottom, and then obviously we see this. And that was the whole reason. So that failure there sort of flicks between human error and our operational limitation. So what do we do? How do we resolve it? We service every 5,000 kilometres. Iraq is not particularly dusty. We don't need the guys to take the air filter out and start banging them out. So we've removed it. That's removed from the weekly checks. So that failure has gone. We've mitigated that failure. Refurbishment. And again, this has been a hot topic probably for the last 18 months, I think, within this industry, driven by the demise of the 200 and the launch of the 300 into this industry in the armoured vehicle area. We were ahead of the game with refurbishment. We started refurbishing vehicles back in 2016, and we've done 200 of our fleet at the moment. Initially, it was driven by a commercial need within our business. Iraq was getting really, really difficult to import vehicles and get import approvals, etc. There was the ban on exporting vehicles from the UAE to Iraq. So there was a whole raft of things that we needed to extend the life of our vehicles that we had in service. So that was the commercial need and the import restriction. So that's really what drove it in the early days. Our aim was ultimately to maintain the safe vehicles, review and inspect the armour solution. Now, the way we did that, it was really rudimental. We just did it with NDT. Because that's all we had available to us, and that's all we could do. Clearly, the transparent armour is slightly different, but the steel armour, all we could do was NDT testing. Restore the aesthetics of the vehicle. You can imagine one of our vehicles that's done 150,000 kilometres with an oil engineer that every day goes from one base to a wellhead, gets back in his dirty overalls and gets back in the vehicle. The aesthetics of our vehicles deteriorate relatively quickly on some of the projects that we deliver and the clients that we support. So restoring aesthetics was quite a key point. And again, going back to your question, was maintaining a common platform. So we used that as an excuse to, across the board, the tyres were changed. Across the board, the suspension was changed. So we ended up at the end of a refurbishment as a new standard of vehicle, or new specification of vehicle, regardless of where it was procured from in the first place. We didn't have the capability to do this ourselves, so we had to collaborate. And the easiest way to collaborate, because of the extent of what we were doing, was to collaborate with a local in-country Toyota dealership. And that's where we went. We set the criteria. So I think initially it was 150,000 kilometres in 4 years. That was the criteria, right? That vehicle's met its refurbishment criteria, and in it goes for refurbishment. It soon became apparent that we needed some flexibility within that criteria, and that was just a benchmark. So that's what we went off, but there was vehicles that we would call in earlier. So we have vehicles that are 2 years old that were on 100,000 kilometres. So they would be bought in early, and likewise we would have 5-year-old vehicles that have only done 60,000 kilometres. So they would be delayed slightly. Programming it, we needed to program it, so we needed to know what was going in, when it was going in, so we could plan and deliver back to the business the capability so they can go and win more work. And key to that part was the supply chain again, because you can see the extent of what we were going to with the vehicles. We were purchasing Toyota parts that were on 9-month lead time, because no one else was ever buying them, because they weren't renewed in the vehicle. You know, you start looking at seats and you start looking at some of the interior panels and stuff. They weren't ordered. They were not, you know, roof linings. Roof linings was a real problem. But that's the extent that we went to with the refurbishment. And there was also a byproduct of this that, you know, our company is, our ESG contribution and our ESG pledge is getting more and more and more prevalent to what we do. And there was also the ESG, you know, we're recycling. We're recycling the fleet. We're not disposing of it. So there was an element of that byproduct, sort of. And then the bottom there, commercial entity, and I'll go back to that. That was purely driven from a commercial need initially, because we needed vehicles back on the road. And the pictures just depict it. That vehicle, the bottom right, I took that 2 weeks ago. That was the latest refurbishment. That was that's on 170,000 kilometres, and it comes out the refurbishment in the condition you can see it there, which is almost brand new. And you can see the extent that we go to. Everything's taken out. You know, the engine's tested. Interestingly, the 200 vehicles, we've not renewed one engine. We've not renewed one gearbox. We've not renewed one axle. It's always only the stuff that fails: the bottom arms, the suspension, the brakes. It's all of that high duty cycle parts of it. The TLC 300 caught us unawares, really. If I'm honest with you. We were probably a little bit late to the party with the 300 and acknowledging that it needed to happen really, really soon. When we started, I think we started looking probably 18 months ago. And rightly or wrongly, you know, industry at the time seemed to be focused on the ballistic and the blast solution. And nobody could give me any data of vehicles that had run any mileage. And when I started to learn about the vehicle and understanding the aluminium doors and, you know, and the high tensile steel in the pillars and the aluminium roof, it started alarm bells ringing, because how on earth are we going to armour this vehicle with these components of these you know, manufacturing? So they were huge. And again, I'll go through some of the main concerns there. Was obviously the reliability. It's key for us. You've seen the mileage that we do. You understand the profile of what we're delivering every day. The reliability is key. Engine and transmission, we only really purchase the diesel variants anyway, so we're going from a 4.5 litre V8 down to 3.3 litre V6, so a significant reduction in engine capacity, similar performance on the power and torque, so that's a plus. Electronics, clearly a far more complex vehicle electronically, a lot more electronical control in the vehicle, so brakes, etc., that we discussed yesterday. The interface of the armour solution. And that was a huge issue, you know. How are you going to armour those doors? They're aluminium. How are we going to make it that they don't deform? How are we going to make it that, you know, in service, going down the road for 2,000 kilometres a week and it's bouncing over all the roads and everything? How are you going to do that it lasts that long? We spoke about the brakes and the suspension as well. And another area, that, again, I'll go back to the supply chain, so us maintaining the vehicles. It's a brand new vehicle. The Toyota dealership, I think they got I think they've got a couple of filters in stock, and that's about it. But there's no bumpers, there's no lights, there's no bottom arms, there's nothing. There's nothing. So that supply chain. So we needed that supply chain to mature, or we needed to provide the supply chain ourselves. So how do we go about it? So our approach was a single vehicle, a single R&D vehicle. We'll throw it into Iraq, and we'll just put it on the high mileage projects, and we'll just run it and 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 try and run it into the ground. Like I say, we accelerated the usage. Another area we had to consider was managing our business. So the business at the time was saying, we haven't had any new vehicles for 12 months. We've got clients that have criteria on vehicle ages and mileages. We need to be out buying vehicles. So I've got 1 minute here, I've got the CEO saying, Justin, you need to buy vehicles. You need to buy vehicles. And we're going, whoa, it's too much risk. Stop. Let's do this right. Let's set the specification. So trying to manage the business, the element of, them wanted more vehicles so they can go and win more work, it was quite difficult at the time. And that one in-service vehicle, we've tried multiple options on it. So springs to mind, and it's easy, is the suspension. I think we're on the 3rd set of suspension now. And that's where we are with the vehicle at the moment. It's been in service since April, and we've covered 33,000 kilometres. I don't think there's anybody else on that sort of mileage with a TLC 300 at this point. We've probably got the most mileage. So what do we find? We can see there, I quote the mileage again. So, as expected, we found some issues with the doors, and we needed to consider with the Armoured that we'd gone into a joint venture with this to do this. So we had to go back, revisit the design, understand why it was doing what it was doing, how we can rectify it within the design, and that's been done. So that alone was worth a huge amount to us, because we saw what was going to fail, we saw how it was going to fail, and we could change the design to go to meet that. So we get a lot of feedback. We put it into multiple clients, ingress and egress in the doors. I'm sure all of you that have looked at the vehicles, the ingress and egress into the doors is a lot smaller. We've got some large clients like the size of Ian, when they're wearing body armour and helmet trying to get in the back of a 300 that's a planned activity. You just don't do that. That's planned. And like I say, the door aperture itself. It might seem quite petty. The tailgate airlock. Huge issue with the tailgate airlock, because what we're doing, we're not going from the split fold. We're going to a huge, great big. So our solution was we had an internal armoured bulkhead door, and then the OEM's tailgate that came down and shut. You would not believe it. Couldn't get the tailgate shut. Could not shut the tailgate, because every time you pushed it down, it just airlocked, because the cabin was sealed. And it might seem quite petty, but actually we were opening the tailgate 10 times a day for whatever the clients are out on the ground, and they're pushing on the back of it. Within a week, we had 2 massive dents in the back of the tailgate where they're just slamming it down. So we've had to do some work on that, getting the air out of that gap, out of the air, so that we can shut the tailgate. And again, it's just those little things that actually, if we'd gone and ordered 30 vehicles, we'd have probably quite a big problem. But because we've done it with that one vehicle, we can actually put it into the design now. Suspension, we've trialled 3 different types, all with varying different pros and cons, etc. And we're fairly content now that we've got a solution that we can go ahead and procure large-scale procurement on a good set of suspension that we've got good data on. Diagnostics, we don't use the Toyota TechStream. We have a different spurious, like a Bosch. None of it works. So we've got to go and invest in all new diagnostics for the vehicle. Engine performance. So focused on a little bit of the negatives there. Actually, I've focused on some of the positives now. We're getting 20% better fuel consumption out of the 300 over the 200. And that's been proven in real life. So we've got a contract that goes from Basra to Nasiriyah each day, every day. It's like a 3.5-hour drive. 3-vehicle team, 2 Land Cruiser 200s and a Land Cruiser 300. They go up and down twice, 2 days running, and then they need to go and refuel. The Land Cruiser 200s are taking 100 litres of fuel. The Land Cruiser 300s is taking 80 litres of fuel for exactly the same distance that they're covering, exactly the same speeds. So, good news. Client feedback. They all comment about the size, the ingress and egress, but actually once they get in it, they're a lot happier, and the vehicle seems to open up. Our trial vehicle's got black interior, which is probably not the best for the aesthetics inside and the way the client feels. But overall, they're happy. The ride of the vehicle, the way it drives, etc. All of our clients, and we've got some really particular clients, they're all relatively happy with it. So in summary then, the Armoured design needs to match the in-service duty cycle. So it's not, you know, when I go back to the beginning, you know, the industry seemed to be focused on the ballistics and blast. Actually, it needs to work. It needs to do more than that 100 kilometres before it breaks down. So, I mean, you know, we've proven that with some of the work we've done. Engine, brakes, transmission, and the overall experience of the vehicle, which is some of the areas we had concern with, are all positive. We've got no issues with it. It's 33,000 kilometres. All we've done is change oil and filters. That's all we've done on that vehicle. We've not changed anything else. And then on the right there, I just picked a few areas. So, again, bone of contention. We run with OEM brakes, and we're still on the OEM brakes. The OEM brakes on the front of that vehicle are still what was on it originally, at 33,000 kilometres. TLC 200 OEM brakes, we can't get no more than 10,000 kilometres out of. So this is significantly better. Interestingly, we changed the rear brake pads at 25,000 kilometres. So they wore out before the fronts, which I find strange. Tyres, I think we were on the first set of tyres, did 25,000 kilometres. So I go back again to setting up the geometry correct at the beginning. If that's done, good longevity on the tyres. The middle one, and again, some human error here, and our maintainers not being trained correctly and using incorrect procedures. So the first one, threads in the uprights, aluminium uprights. And we were changing suspension, as I alluded to, the 3 different systems almost every week at one point. We were going back to the other system, back to back, back to back, back to back. They cross-threaded the bolts that go up inside the aluminium uprights. Wouldn't have done that with steel, but actually, because it was the aluminium, they just put them in the nut gun, fired them up in, and cross-threaded the bolts up in that there. On the rear dampers, they push onto a lug. They didn't use copper slip on the lug, and they actually seized a damper onto the lug. We couldn't get it off. We actually had to cut it off in the end. So just some of the areas that this vehicle is a lot more technical. It's a lot more less antiquated maintenance. It needs a bit of a higher standard maintainer, probably because of some of the componentry that's used in it, that the use of aluminium to get the weight down, etc., etc. Overall, the outcome, we're happy with the 300, and we're going to go and proceed and order our first bulk purchase of TLC 300s. So very happy. So control risks in the future then. Our fleet will be based in Iraq entirely on the TLC 300, the Coaster, and continuing use of the 200 as far as we can. We'll continue to develop our design, and our specification will change, and that will evolve and evolve, as I've alluded to with you there. Our environmental and sustainability pledge, we need to work harder at that, and just some of the areas we've looked at on that. So we operate in 3 vehicle teams. So the teams will go out to a location, they'll sit on a wellhead or whatever, and the oil engineers will go off, or the diplomats will go into a building for a meeting or whatever. What we've done now is we force it upon the guys. They all go and sit in the one vehicle and leave that one vehicle running because it's 52 degrees outside, and switch off the other 2, so we're reducing the static running. And it's just simple things like that, but actually it makes a big difference towards the end. So there's longevity of the AC components, there's the reduction in fuel, etc., etc. We're going to expand our in-house maintenance capability and continue the efficiencies there. That's one of the key areas of our fleet management program and what we deliver. And again, my colleague from the Geneva office here will understand that last point, the data-driven and develop the digital solutions is one of the strap lines of control risks at the moment. What do I mean by that? So get smarter in the reporting. We're in the world of computers and everything nowadays, the internet. It's wonderful. Let's start using that and the data that's available and software that's available. So one of the areas we're looking at the moment is driver apps. All of our teams have got smartphones now, so just put the app on there, open up the app. The driver has to tick that he's fit to drive, he's not under the influence of alcohol, he's not under the influence of drugs or whatever else. Then goes on to the driver checks. He physically goes down, checks all the checks. If he doesn't click all of that and the vehicle starts moving, our ops rooms start getting alarms. And it's just things like that we can manage, take the management back of what they're doing on the ground and force them to do stuff. So there's a lot of digital solutions and ways we can manage the data a lot better. Final slide, promise. A bit of a takeaway and food for thought, really. And we've talked about this. I told you one size does not fit all. Going across the oil fields of southern Iraq, that picture on the left is a vehicle in Mozambique. Why the team would pick that route to take a five-ton armoured vehicle down, I have no idea, but they did, and got it stuck for 2 days. That was stuck in there for 2 days. That vehicle is completely different, like I explained to you before, in Mozambique. Own that design, continue to develop that specification as the users. Middle one, information, data, whatever you want to call it. We need more smart ways of gathering that data, interpreting that data, use that data to evolve our fleets, evolve how we maintain, evolve the specification, etc. And then my final point, training, and a bit more training. And that's not just the driver, as I alluded to earlier. That's not just the driver. You know, it's the driver, the commander who's controlling the vehicle, the maintainer, the managers, the higher management. You know, it's so important that they understand the constraints of operating these vehicles in these environments, and what we have to deal with. And you know, I quite often get, why do we service every 5,000 kilometres? Well, because that's what we need to do. Because if we don't, the vehicles will start breaking, they'll start falling over, etc., etc. But you know, the commercial entity element is on at me all of the time. What can we do? What can we do? What can we do? We're doing as much as we can. We're doing as much as we can. But you need to educate them, you know, the higher management on this, so specifically in the commercial world. You'll be pleased that's it from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Amazing. Thank you very much. It hits home that critical importance of going beyond just the procurement process and all the work you're doing before, and as you say, owning the specifications and then bringing it out into the field. So a few of the things that I've taken away, which we keep talking about with our clients, data. If you don't have the information, you don't know what's going on, you don't make the right decisions, and money goes in the wrong direction. The collection of the data, and this is one of the big issues we find, has to be resourced. If people in the field aren't gathering the information and able to transmit, whether by paper or by an application, through to a central database for which then trend analysis can occur, you don't then go from data to knowledge, information to knowledge to wisdom. And in many cases, organisations feel constrained for various potentially financial or cultural reasons not to sufficiently resource the fleet management side along as it is. And the other big takeaway is trialling, is before making a decision of what component to use or what not to use, is actually to conduct trials so that you get data.
Yeah.
And then you get understanding along the way. And if I may add, when you say training, yes, I would add to that is also a cultural training, that there's a level of ownership from the bottom up. So from the driver who owns that vehicle, is responsible for the performance and the outcomes of that vehicle as it drives up through to the maintainers, the fleet managers, the equipment directors and the senior managers. And without all that working together, your cost per mile and your operational availability just goes out the way. So thank you very much. An outstanding presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll take some questions from the floor for about another 10 minutes, and then we'll close for breaks. You're going to wait because you spoke. No, I'm kidding. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, you go.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Really impressive. One question regarding test vehicle of the TLC 300. What was the operational or the GVW?
4.6 ton.
Thank you very much.
So if the GVW was 4.6, what was your payload capability per vehicle?
I think it was 600 kilos.
600 kilos.
Yeah.
So that's logging. Okay, very good.
Thanks, Rob. Being Remy, you'll kind of know where I'm going with this. So completely understand you're taking the specification, so you're owning the safety case and acting as what I'd call the design authority if we're dealing with the military. But when I understand I missed a spicy conversation earlier about certification, which, not trying to bring that back up, but when you talk about certification in terms of drivability, if you're specifying the suspension, then how are you doing things like PAS 301 to make sure that the system that you've got is safe to operate?
So we haven't, in answer to your question, we haven't done PAS 301. It's all been live testing in live scenarios. Going forward with the 300, you know, I've been involved with one of the armourers with PAS 301 with a suspension system, and I know there's appetite to go to a different suspension system and a different tyre, and you know, there's a whole PAS 301. You know, a standard's got to be something, and it exists. So absolutely right. So the road handling characteristics, we should be aiming for that. But there's such a big recipe of what that vehicle can be, whether it's on tyre X or tyre Y or suspension X, suspension Y, and that all makes a huge difference. So I think, you know, for us, we've almost probably got to drive that PAS 301 with you know, our supplier, in the fact that we want it done at that spec, that vehicle, go and do it, and it'll be added to the cost of the vehicle or whatever the case may be, or we pay it for a one-off test. So yes, going forward, yes. Historically, no, we've not. It's been legacy from in-service data.
Also, thank you very much. I think it is very timely, and I really appreciate that you share the experience at this point in this community, which is not always the case. But I have two small questions. The first one is, would you be able to share the differences in the specifications, just one or two examples between Mozambique and Iraq? And the other one was, you at the beginning you underlined the in-house maintenance. Is this only the case in Iraq or also in Mozambique and the small locations?
Yeah, so I'll do that question first, the in-house maintenance. We use outsourced maintenance in Mozambique. That figure of 10 cents per kilometre in Iraq, we're almost at $1 a kilometre in Mozambique. You know, we're not doing the miles. We're not doing anywhere near the miles in Mozambique of what we're doing in Iraq. Yet the maintenance is huge. You know, it's massive. So answering that question, that's that done. The difference in specification between the two areas, and we've been caught out with this. We didn't get this right. So vehicles fitted with winches, tyres being completely different because of the terrain we're operating on. One of the areas we really got caught out in Mozambique is corrosion. We didn't specify any underbody treatment when the vehicle was new, you know, and we've had coasters we've had to destroy, or a coaster we've had to destroy because there was a hole in the roof, that big, where it just the metal just corroded away, just disappeared, and a hole appeared. So we completely underestimated that terrain and that environment and what it would do to the vehicle. So, you know, there's the normal specification things, like I say, winches and tyres, and suspension is the same. We've had to uprate some of the suspension mountings because of the terrain, because we saw some failures. And then the other main area is corrosion in that country. Huge problem, when realistically we should have specified when we purchase the vehicles, they all need to be rust treated underneath.
I think on top of that, if I may add as well, what I think one of the messages for the takeaways here as well is that from the fleet management perspective, and the headquarters, if you like, the requirement for technical expertise to be able to review that data and information, to conduct the investigations and the analysis, and then to make decisions accordingly. Where it is that, and there are constraints, we talked about this yesterday, that some of the fleet management and the headquarter areas are not manned with the type of technical expertise that they need. And it's another constraint along the way.
Yeah, no, we have clients, so we do all of the big oil companies in Iraq, all of the big ones, and they'll send us a specification in amongst their tender to provide the security for them. And it's like Johnny H5's written it. You know, and these are billion dollar organisations, and it literally is like Johnny H5 has done it. And, you know, I think your presentation yesterday where you alluded, upgraded brakes, and that's it. You know, well, what does that? This doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean, you know, what it should be doing is referencing performance, in my opinion, as opposed to upgrading brakes. So, yes, you're right. Our end users, which specifying certain specifications, you have no idea. It's just a Google sift for a load of comments, and away you go. And we go back to them quite often. So the contract that we won earlier this year, or the end of last year, that's quite big, they had a refurbishment specification, their own refurbishment specification. And it was literally renew injectors, renew alternator, renew starter motor, renew condenser. And it was just a list, pages and pages and pages of just renew all of these components for no reason whatsoever. You know, the mechanicals amongst us, you know, if an injector's not working, it won't work. There's no in between. It shouldn't be lifed. And there was a whole raft of those components. And we actually went back to them with our data that existed and said, you know, why are you replacing the UJ joints on the pop shaft? You know, we've run 9 million kilometres a year. We've never changed one. And all of a sudden, you're going to introduce human error because you're going to get a human now that's going to go in and pull a UJ apart and put the UJ back together. And there's a whole raft of human error that can go into putting a UJ together, as most of you will know. It just makes no sense when the data says it doesn't need renewing.
All right, good. All right. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Outstanding
Thank you very much.
presentation. Thank you indeed.